Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt. My name is Matt and I'm joined by Stefan and Ewan to discuss the future of Chelsea's Conor Gallagher. The player has been close to an exit a number of times over the last 12 months, and the latest club rumoured to be attempting to sign him is Atletico Madrid. There's a deal apparently on the table for about €40 million. However, the player is believed to still be open to discussing a long-term contract with Chelsea, despite recent rumours that he has rejected a 3-year contract offer from his current club. Ewan, I want to come to you first on this, and let's just talk about why Chelsea might be looking to sell Conor Gallagher. Do you think it's the right decision from them to try and move him on?
It really comes down to one thing, that's his contract situation at Chelsea. He's only got a year left in his deal, so if Chelsea can't get him in a new contract, they have to sell him this summer. It's quite similar to the Mason Mount situation last summer, where Chelsea were in a very similar position. They had that young academy graduate who'd done quite well in the first team, who had a year left in his contract. He wasn't signing a new contract, so Chelsea had to sell him, and they'd done fantastically well. Chelsea to get €64 million from Mason Mount. I think most people would say that was a really decent fee for a player who's only got a year left in his contract. Obviously, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but if you look how Mount's season progressed and he barely played due to injury, it looks even better. And we factor that in that Chelsea managed to get Cole Palmer later in the window for €47 million. They've kind of essentially traded Mount for Palmer, and they got 16 million extra in the bank. So Chelsea's youth record and selling youth players, I think Stefan's done a really good piece on that as well. It's well documented across recent years. There's so many examples of them moving on players, whether that's the right or wrong decision. That comes down to perspective, I suppose. But Gallagher was really good for Chelsea last season. He was probably one of their shining lights, and what was a poor season, albeit they ended quite well under Richard Pochettino. So it feels like there's a lot of bargaining going on here between Chelsea, Gallagher and his representatives at other clubs, and I'd be really interested to see if he stays or if he goes. But ultimately, if he's not going to sign a new contract, then Chelsea simply have to cash in this summer.
I think the biggest frustration, Stefan, amongst Chelsea fans last season in particular, when Gallagher last summer was looking to maybe go to Spurs, and in the last 6 months Aston Villa have been touted as a potential destination as well. The frustration was that Mauricio Pochettino seemed to really love the player and wanted to keep him in that squad, where it was the board who seemed to be pushing a sale there. Now, of course, we don't know the situation with Enzo Maresca coming in, whether or not he thinks the player is one that he wants in his squad. But do you think, I suppose the same question I said to you, and do you think it's a right decision from Chelsea to try and sell him at this point?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably a safe assumption to make that Pochettino did want to keep Conor Gallagher, and we can see that quite clearly from the fact that he played more minutes than any other Chelsea player in that team last season across all competitions. He was an ever-present member of the squad. And Ewan's absolutely spot on to say that he's down to his last year in his contract. It's maybe the right time to sell him, but kind of wider context is this is a player that Chelsea have basically been punting in the shop window for at least the last 12 months, and much like the Mason Mount situation, and much like just about any youth academy player at Chelsea over the last kind of 5 or 10 years, they never really know what their standing is at the club, and at any point they could be sold and cashed in on for the sake of bringing in someone else at the club. As you said, I have done a piece. I've been updated through the summer because they keep selling youth academy players, but over the course of the last 10 years, they've made something like, and if Gallagher does move on for €40 million, it'll take their sales for youth academy players in the last 10 years to €476 million, which is about a third of their total income from selling players in that period. It's a truly ridiculous amount of money. This summer alone, they've already sold Hall, they sold Hutchinson, they sold Dean Matson to Aston Villa, and of course Gallagher would be the fourth academy player that they've moved on. It makes business sense because a lot of these players were signed for nothing, so they get sold for pure profit. And it means that Chelsea can kind of push that back into their accountancy books, and it means that they can spend more money in the transfer window. My question is, really, what is the end goal here? Because, Chelsea's league performances over the last 10 years have been very hot and cold. They've won the league title twice in the last 10 seasons, which isn't bad, I suppose, considering Manchester City's dominance. But really, if you compare them to maybe Arsenal and Liverpool, they've been really nowhere near those two clubs in terms of being genuine title contenders to Manchester City. So on paper, it seems like a really smart operation to sell these young players, bring in other players, but you have to wonder whether it's actually helping him from a sporting point of view. And if you look at what Gallagher did for Chelsea last season, I think there's an argument to be said that from a sporting point of view, he really should be getting kept on. I thought he was a great box-to-box player. In terms of goals and assists in the league, he was third behind Cole Palmer, who obviously ran away with it, and Nicholas Jackson, but he was level with Raheem Sterling for those very direct goals and assists. If you then want to kind of go further into the details, like key passes, for example, he was second only to Cole Palmer. Key pass, of course, being a pass that leads to a shot. So he was a really kind of underrated playmaker, in my opinion, in that Chelsea team. And if you kind of look at the tackles and interceptions as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was top for interceptions across the whole Chelsea team, second for tackles behind Moises Caicedo, and actually top for tackles and interceptions in the final thirds, second for tackles and interceptions in the defensive third and the middle third. So all that's to really say that he really was quite an accomplished box-to-box midfielder for Chelsea. And, you know, I guess you could probably say Maresca will probably look at his team and say, well, look, I've got about 7 or 8 central midfielders. I shouldn't be wanting for another one if Gallagher does move on. But what it does mean is that one of those midfielders that they have brought in, a lot of them are very young, a lot of them don't have a lot of experience playing for a team like Chelsea. Not only do they have to earn their spot in the team, but they're going to have to replace what I thought was one of Chelsea's top performers last season. And like I said, on paper, it makes sense to sell a youth player, get the pure profit, invest it back into the team. But I think from a sporting point of view, I think it's a huge risk for Chelsea. We'll just kind of have to wait and see what Maresca has in store to replace what Gallagher brought to that team last season.
I think even at just 24 years of age, Gallagher does bring a lot of experience into a team that you mentioned there, Stefan, is quite young, having had his season at West Brom, his season at Crystal Palace, and now a couple of seasons under his belt in that first team in Chelsea. He has played a lot of Premier League football. Ewan, do you agree with Stefan's analysis there of what Gallagher brings to Chelsea and what he could potentially bring to a team like Atletico Madrid?
Oh, you've muted yourself, Ian.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, as Stefan just outlined really well there, you look at his statistics and you can't argue with his impact at Chelsea last season. He was one of their best performers, as I stated earlier. I personally think you could upgrade on Conor Gallagher and Chelsea's starting 11 in terms of where Chelsea's ambitions are. They want to be, back competing for the Champions League. They want to be back competing for the Premier League title. Do I think Conor Gallagher is good enough to play in a side to do that? I don't think he's a regular starter in a side to do that. Whether he can be an effective squad player 100%. And look, it might make sense for him to stay at the club, but it's all going to come down to whether he signs a new contract or not, because if he doesn't, he's going. So yeah, he's had huge value to Chelsea. Stefan makes a really good point about how many players Chelsea have brought through and then sold. You can't argue with the money they brought in, but you maybe look at it and break it down player on player. How many of those players that they sold would get in their starting lineup now? It's quite an interesting way of looking at it. But I think if you look at Chelsea's team, I think Fernandes and Caicedo will be two of the starting midfielders next season. That depends what you do with Cole Palmer. Does Maresca maybe want to use Cole Palmer as number 10, and then you've got a kind of double pivot behind and Caicedo and Fernandes, or does he want to keep Cole Palmer playing off the right hand side? He's also brought in Kieran Dewsbury Hall, who I think is quite comparable to Gallagher in a lot of metrics, although I think Gallagher is a better player at this current time, and also Gallagher's shown he can do it at the top flight, where Dewsbury Hall's not really done that as much over the course of his career at Leicester. So it's really interesting. I think if Gallagher stayed at the club, I don't think many Chelsea fans would argue with that, because he does provide value. I don't think, like I said earlier, I don't think he's a player who will start week in, week out for a team that wants to compete for the major honours. But he can be a really good squad player. He's by all accounts a great character. He's got a great work ethic. So he's also kind of a homegrown player. So it's interesting. I think it's all going to come down to his contract situation. I kind of think I'm kind of edging towards it. He will say a new deal in Chelsea. I think it's all sides are kind of trying to play off each other at the moment, and I wouldn't be shocked, if he signed a new long-term deal at Chelsea.
Stefan, what do you think the right move for the player would be at this point of his career? Because I think heading out of England has shown for some players in the past that it's not the best path to get into the national team. I know Gallagher is there already, but you look at a player like Fikayo Tomori, who was performing so well at AC Milan, and under Gareth Southgate he couldn't get a look in at that national team. And I know we have the exceptions of Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham of late, but I think they're probably too talented to kind of put it in that category of players who will be affected by a move abroad.
Yeah, well, I think in Tomori's case, that probably says more about Gareth Southgate's maybe prejudice about Italian football than it does about Tomori's performances for AC Milan. But yeah, I think it's a really important thing to point out that, you know, regardless of what's going at Chelsea, Gallagher has to think about his own situation. And it's all well and good if Chelsea do offer him a new contract extension, but if they can't offer him promises that he will start in that team next season, then there's really no point in him sticking around. He's probably walked away from Euro 2024 thinking, I need to start playing not only regularly, but I have to be the star of the next team I join to make sure I can keep up with the likes of Declan Rice, Jude Bellingham, of course. There's Adam Wharton, who's kind of coming up behind him as well, who should be making arguments for a starting spot. Alex Scott Bournemouth's another one that I keep raving about. I think it's going to be a potential England international. So he's going to have a lot of potential or a lot of kind of competition for the England spot. And you only have to kind of go through his Chelsea team to see where Maresca might try and replace him. As Ewan said, he's got a lot of players who can come in. Romeo Lavia, for example, is a player who hasn't even really had a look in since he joined Chelsea. There's also an argument to be made that Christopher Nkunku, who is naturally a number 10, obviously hasn't really had a shot either at Chelsea. So you can see where Maresca might go to a back two, as Ewan said, with Fernandes and Caicedo, and slot someone like Christopher Nkunku in there as a number 10, in which case, you know, Gallagher really doesn't have much of a shot going forward. So I think Gallagher's a good player. I think he's been a great player for Chelsea, but I think he probably has to figure out really carefully where he can go and get game time and be like a kind of star number 8 for a very good team. It doesn't have to be outside the Premier League. I think there's still a lot of clubs there who could do a good job for him. But you know, I think his next move will be crucial to see if he can kind of keep a spot in the England squad and prove to Chelsea fans and to this team and to the club itself that he is a top class player.
There's also been suggestions that Cole Palmer could be utilised in a more central role this season, so I think the pecking order isn't favourable for Conor Gallagher in that position at all. Let us know down in the comments below your thoughts on Conor Gallagher and where you think he might be plying his trade next season. Hit the subscribe button if you want more of these chats throughout the summer, and hit the like button if you've enjoyed this one in particular. But for now, thanks for watching.